All right, guys, so we got to talk about this exchange, this debate between Byron Donalds, who's a Republican from Florida, and Chuck Todd, who's a Democrat Party propagandist that works for NBC News. He was the host of Meet the Press. He stepped down from that role because, right, of conversations like this, in my opinion, in which Chuck Todd is going to get steamrolled with facts from Byron Donalds in regards to the tax policy of the GOP, namely the Trump tax cuts of 2017 that have been heavily criticized by the Democrats. Okay, we know one lie that the Democrats put out about Trump tax cuts is that they were tax cuts for the rich, that the rich mostly benefited, which we know is not true, right? We know that is not true. That is demonstrably false. Okay, and Chuck Todd here is, again, going to play Democrat Party propagandist and is going to get caught up in his lies doing this debate with Byron Donalds, because Byron Donalds, honestly, is just too smart and too witty for propagandists. But before I get into this, I just want to let you guys know, if you like my channel and you support my channel, you can check out my merch. Like, for example, my racist mug, which is a daily reminder of the 2023 definition of racist according to left, which is anybody who disagrees with the Democrat Party. My logo is also on the back of this mug. You can also check out my shirts, like, for example, my base shirt. You can check that out at my website, gforemanbcp.com. Get 20% off using discount code TEAMBCP. So without further ado, roll the clip.
Realize that President Trump has added more to the deficit than Joe Biden. Some of it's COVID. Some of it's COVID.
Most of it is COVID. Let's be clear with the people.
Half of it's COVID and half of it's the tax cut.
That is not true, because we raised more revenue. We raised more revenue than CBO projected. If you bring in more money than your projections are, how are you adding to your deficits, Chuck?
Yeah, and if somehow you keep cutting taxes but more revenue comes into the government, that math doesn't work over time. You can have it in the first year due to some various accounting tricks, but it doesn't work over time.
No, Chuck, that is not true. The purpose of tax policy is to raise revenue for the federal government, not to equalize society. After the Trump tax cuts were passed, more tax revenue has come to the federal government than at any other time in the history of our nation. Those are the facts.
Raw dollars can happen because we do.
And a percentage of the economy.
One more thing House Republicans are asking for, which is they want fewer IRS agents. They want fewer attempts to try to properly get tax receipts into the federal government's coffers. I have never understood the resistance of extra IRS agents unless you knowingly cheat on your taxes.
First of all, that's salacious, and you know that. Most Americans, by far, pay their taxes, and they do it honorably. What House Republicans, and frankly the Republican Party, is concerned about is having IRS agents go after middle-class families and small business owners. When you have that many more agents, it's not to go after the rich. It's to go after the middle class. That's what it's for.
So if you're paying what you're supposed to pay, then you should have nothing to fear.
You would make the assumption that IRS audits are up, that they're putting out more liens on the American people. That's not true. That data's not there. All Joe Biden's trying to do is find every possible nickel out of every couch from every American to pay for his radical spending. Why would we do that? Listen, let me contrast for you. When we passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, CBO said it was going to cost $2 trillion. That's actually not true. What ended up happening was the federal government took in $1 trillion more than CBO actually projected. The economy grew another 1% over projections.
We can't litigate the tax cuts because of what happened with COVID. We don't know how much this ate into everything, but it certainly looks like there were going to be fewer revenues coming into the government, but we don't know. In fairness,
fewer revenues now.
There's no ability to litigate this because of what happened with COVID and the extra spending.
That is not true, Chuck. In 2019, we took in more revenue than we ever have in the history of our nation. As much of a percentage of our economy than we ever have as a nation. That was 2019. Tax receipts are still up.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy. The propaganda is heavy with this one, okay? I mean, Chuck Todd is just flat out lying, right? I'm so serious. Like, I actually have not seen a liberal media host just flat out lie and play Democrat Party propagandist the way that Chuck Todd just did in that interview. I mean, there was nothing objective about what this man just said. Because notice how at the beginning, right, he tried to say that, well, deficits under Trump went up. The deficit went up under Trump because of COVID and the GOP tax cuts, right? He specifically blamed the GOP tax cuts. He's saying that, well, the deficit has went up because of the tax cuts. Okay, this is a Democrat Party talking point that they use, right? And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And why that's not necessarily true. And then he says later on in the interview, when Byron Donalds gives facts that no, under Trump, tax revenues actually went up, which they did every single year except 2020. After the tax cuts, he says, well, we don't know that, right? We can't litigate that. We don't know if the Trump tax cuts are actually responsible for that. Wait, but Chuck Todd, you just said that because of the Trump tax cuts and COVID, that is why deficits went up under Trump, right? Wait, so how now all of a sudden when Byron Donalds said, no, the tax cuts are not the reason why the deficit went up, and he provides facts and evidence, again, look at the revenue that the government has bought in, okay, since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Again, look at this. Went up 2018, went up 2019, okay, went down a little bit in 2020, but again, that was COVID, right? The economy wasn't necessarily doing so well. And then in 2021, it's back up. It's the highest it's ever been. So how in the world were the GOP tax cuts responsible for increasing the deficit if government revenues continue to increase? That doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't make sense. But again, when he was pushing Democrat Party talking points, he wanted to blame the Trump tax cuts for the deficit, right? He wanted to blame it. But then once he got direct rebuttal with facts that that's not the case, well, we don't know, right? We really don't know. There's no way to tell, right? At first, it looked like that the government revenue was going to go down, right? Again, I mean, just caught up in a blatant lie, just playing loose with the facts. I mean, not even using facts at all. It's a shame, right? But again, when people talk about the deficit, right, and how much the deficit increased under Trump, which is a legitimate criticism, right? It's a legitimate criticism. But if you look at the rate in which the debt was increasing under Trump and Obama, I mean, it was basically identical until COVID, right? I mean, there was basically no change. The problem, I guess, the most legitimate criticism of the Trump administration and the Republicans too at the time, because it's not just Trump. Trump is just the president. The Republicans in Congress have to actually pass bills that cut spending. Yeah, it's the fact that the Trump administration and the Republicans didn't cut spending, right? They did a good job of increasing revenues by cutting taxes, because cutting taxes unleashed more of the economy, right? It helped the economy grow. Okay, we had probably the strongest economy that we had in a long, long time in the Trump administration, and I think that the tax cuts were partially responsible for that. Okay, but yeah, they didn't do a good job of cutting spending, right? They didn't do a good job of cutting spending. That is a legitimate criticism. But don't sit here and lie to the American people and try to pretend that the tax cuts were responsible for increasing the deficit when there's no facts and evidence to back up that claim, especially considering how tax revenues continue to increase despite the tax cuts. Now, what happened with COVID, I think Trump should get a mulligan on that, because one, here's the thing. A lot of people like to play Monday morning quarterback with COVID, right? Particularly when it comes to lockdowns. Like, for example, Trump and DeSantis supporters go back and forth about, well, DeSantis decided not to lock down and Trump was pro-lockdown. When that's actually not true. DeSantis locked down Florida and Trump was kind of pro-lockdown as well, too. Like everybody else in the country kind of was when the pandemic first started. Nobody knew what COVID was, right? Nobody knew that COVID would end up being the way that it was, that we took it a lot more seriously than we should have taken it, right? We did more than we should have done. But once the writing was on the wall, once people saw that, okay, this is not as serious as we think it is, Trump and DeSantis both came out against the lockdowns at the same time. Now, DeSantis, as governor, had more power in his state to open up his state than Trump had as president to open up the country, because Democrats decided to lock down their states. I think Trump gets way too much blame for the lockdowns during COVID from conservatives. I also think that he gets way too much blame for the spending as well, too, because, again, nobody knew, right? Nobody knew. I think where you actually start to blame politicians is when the writing is on the wall and it's like, okay, we have more data points. We know that this is not as serious as we thought. Yeah, maybe we should stop spending money. Like, for example, when Biden took office in 2021, right, at the beginning of the year, most financial institutions projected a hot economy. They projected that the economy was going to grow because of the prior stimulus packages under Trump administration that cost a lot of money. Democrats and Republicans agreed on it. Okay. There was no need for another stimulus package, but Democrats did it anyways because it was politically expedient for them to do it. They said, you know what? We're going to do our own stimulus package. We're going to run up the deficit even more. We're going to spend more money because we want to make sure that we can say that, hey, we gave you guys stimulus checks too, right? They did it for votes, but we didn't need it. And I think that that is the primary reason why we have inflation, because a lot of people want to also blame Trump for inflation. And I'm not saying that Trump doesn't have anything to do with that. But again, under Trump, we had a more serious situation than we had under Biden. We had more information and more data points, and we did not need a stimulus package at that time. We didn't need it. Okay, the economy was projected to do well. If we just open back up and we stop spending, we will be in a lot better place now, okay, than we are, because, you know, we would not have spent all that money, right? I mean, that's what I believe personally, okay? But again, this idea that the GOP tax cuts increase the deficit, it's just ridiculous, right? I mean, that there's no facts to support that, okay? In fact, tax revenues, again, particularly corporate tax revenues, hit a record high. Let's actually read about this, because I think this is a great little blog here that really shows you guys that Democrats are just full of it when it comes to this issue. A new report from the Congressional Budget Office shows that corporate tax revenue is set to hit a new record of $454 billion, 22% higher than last year's record. CBO analysis contradicts President Biden's false claims that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act led to less revenue from corporations. Yeah, again, it's funny how that works. When you cut taxes, okay, the government will take in more revenue because guess what? The economy grows, right? The economy grows. So that way, the government will collect more tax receipts. Again, this stuff is not hard, right? It's not that hard. This amount exceeds CBO's own forecast prior to enactment of the Trump tax cuts and debunks Democrats' main excuse to raise taxes on American businesses. And they really want to raise taxes on the middle class, right? They want to raise taxes on middle class businesses, small businesses, okay? This is why they want the IRS agents, because the IRS agents, again, when you're training 87,000 new IRS agents, right? They're not going to beat an accountant that is working for, you know, these multi-million, multi-billion dollar corporations and billionaires and millionaires. They're not going to beat those accountants. Those accountants are the best of the best, right? Not some newbie IRS agent that was just trained. They're not going to beat those guys, right? They're going after the small business owners that can't necessarily afford the great accountants, or don't necessarily have a great accountant, that are doing their own bookkeeping, where they want to basically try to squeeze as much as they can out of the middle class. That's what they're doing, okay? I mean, this is just common sense. Even the Biden administration predicts that under Republicans' tax reform law, corporate tax revenues will climb in 2025 to an even higher amount than the Trump administration predicted in 2017. As the Tax Foundation points out, it seems clear that the 2017 tax reform did not substantially reduce the revenue potential of the corporate tax. The corporate tax revenue is shattering records under Republican tax reform. Corporate tax revenue is coming in 22% higher than last year's record level, according to the CBO's most recent monthly budget review. Corporate tax revenue is set to hit a new record of $454 billion. CBO had predicted in June 2017 that corporate tax revenue will only hit $389 billion in 2022. As a share of GDP, corporate tax revenue is on track to reach its highest level since 2015, 1.9% of GDP. Overall tax revenue is also strong, including individual payroll and other taxes. Individual tax receipts reach an all-time high of $2.04 trillion in fiscal year 2021. Receipts are already coming in 36% higher in fiscal year 2022. Total federal tax collections, including payroll and other taxes, are on track to reach $5.04 trillion in fiscal year 2022, or 21% of GDP. This would be a new all-time high in both cases. Again, these are the facts. Okay, these are the facts. Okay, and you know, I mean, to me, it's just funny that doing an exchange like that, Chuck Todd just didn't give a damn about the facts, right? He straight up came with Democrat talking points, not backed up by any data, not backed up by any evidence. And this is basic stuff, right? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look up the basic facts and to see that, wow, this guy just straight up lied, right? This guy just straight up lied on national television on behalf of the Democrat Party. And then these journalists want to boohoo, whine, and cry when people call them out for their biases and say that, look, we don't respect your profession anymore because you guys are straight up partisan actors. I mean, it's amazing. It really blows my mind. So again, kudos to Byron Donalds because, I mean, this man has a bright future. I mean, he is clearly one of the most talented Republicans in Congress. And again, I love when he goes on liberal media and television and takes on these liberal media pundits because he destroys them almost every single time. I mean, it is very fun to watch. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.